terms of the panel, we've tried to engage people that are at different levels of experience, if you like, and also function. So we've got Austin Ward, who's the youth pastor at HopeUC, and give him a round of applause. And then we've got Scott Norling, who's an incredible leader, been involved in missions for a long time and in different leadership capacities, actually around the world. And if you ever get the chance to listen to Scott tell his story, it's more than worth it. We've got Pastor Wayne Alcorn here as well. Is Ethan here? Can we have a mic for Pastor Wayne? Pastor Wayne's been a youth pastor. He was my youth pastor, and then I was his youth pastor. He's been a senior leader, he's been a state leader, a national leader. It's lots of experience there. And Jessica has been part of HopeUC here and co-leads with her husband Steve, and I think has a very unique perspective on ministry as well. So I'm going to ask them some questions around leadership, and then if we have time, we'll have a Q&A at the end of that, so please write your questions down. If we get time for that, we'll go there. So I'm going to start with Austin up the other end, because I know he'll really like that. But
it's leadership. You just got, yes.
Just straight in. Our leadership answer at HopeUC is, if we ask you to do something, the answer is? I'd love to. I'd love to. So, Austin, question for you. Yeah. What has been the biggest surprise or challenge for you stepping into leadership as a young person?
I think I'll have something quite... I'll give a negative and a positive. Is that all right?
That's great.
What do we want to start with? Negative or positive? I think the biggest challenge of, I guess, stepping into leadership in a ministry sense for me, you have a lot of coffees with people, you have a lot of catch-ups with people, but at the end of the day, sometimes you're not catching up with someone just to chew the fat. And if I'm honest with the room, I think friendships in a leadership capacity has probably been the biggest challenge for me. Yeah. Is having solid friendships. I know that's being a little bit raw, but sometimes you can just really outwork yourself and catch up with lots of people, but really you just sometimes you just need to sit with a mate and talk it through. And I think that's been a challenge for me, outworking and ongoing, and talking to people about that. But I think the encouraging thing about leadership from, I guess, the perspective of youth ministry and things is I believe, a lot of people can say, I'm young and people don't give young people a chance. I have never felt that in my work or what I do. I think the generation that we're at now are looking for young people to step up and lead. Yeah. And I've never felt, people are looking down on me, people are doing this, people aren't letting me lead at the age I'm at. I think there is a handout from the older generation to go, we want to be led by you. Yeah. And that's surprised me.
Yeah, great.
In some sense.
Great. Jess, I'm gonna go to you next. So what have you learned about co-leading in both marriage and ministry?
Ooh.
So you want to tell everyone just your family dynamic.
Okay. Does it mean like
husband and kids?
Is it good or not? Yeah.
We won't go there just yet.
I'm married to Steve Bruce, and we've been married for 15 years now, which makes me old. Not in that way. It makes me young, actually. We got 3 kids. We met when I was his youth pastor, and. A little bit of an age gap, but not too big. Anyway, so we actually met because of ministry, and it was amazing. I knew when I was marrying him that there was a church in us together, and so that's part of our dynamics. And we lead currently this campus recently, so we get to lead together. We've been pastoring together over those years, and there's been different experiences with that. So it's interesting leading. Is there anyone in the room lead with a spouse or, yeah? Yes? It's great, it's exciting. And then there's some fights, right? It's good. But one of the challenges that I've had over time, it's not so much about just because of marriage, but it's just actually about personality. I am a bit of a go-getter, like I've got leadership and all the rest of it, but I'm also pretty chill. So if someone that I'm leading with, if someone's leading really well, I'm like, yes, I can relax and just like sit back a little bit. So we've sort of learned early on in our marriage, sometimes we actually need to lead separately and have different focuses so that I don't just sit back and take the back seat, but actually keep doing what God has called me to do and then us to do together, leading forward. So that's what we've learned over time.
And have you found that, obviously you've had to wrestle it out in your relationship with each other. What about in terms of leading a campus or the church? Have you found that you've had to sort of wrestle that with people in your campus as well? The fact that you haven't taken a backward seat, a back seat, and you've had to step forward into the leadership areas that are your gift?
Well, there's still some times when people want to introduce me as the pastor's wife and say, this is my pastor's wife here, Jessica, and I correct them and say, actually, I'm the pastor with my husband, say it in love. So it's really interesting because we have a culture, and I don't think they meant it in a bad thing. It is the era from, 50, 60 years ago that there was pastors' wives, which is awesome. But I am a pastor and I am a minister. And I'm not a minister because of who I'm married to. I'm a minister because that's the call of God on my life. So I know that, and I kind of want to help other people to know that. If they want to put me in a box, I'm like, I'm not in that box. This is who I am. And I think, there's been times when, there's people might have different values or beliefs about if women can lead or not. And I think there's just a lot of grace to go, if that's part of your journey, but it's not going to limit me because I know what I'm called to do. And I'm in an incredible church that releases me to do what I'm called to do. So,
yeah, beautiful. Well said. Well said. Pastor Wayne and Pastor Scott, I'm going to ask you both the same question. So the question for you both is, what advice would you give to your younger self regarding leadership, knowing what you know now?
All right. Okay, I'll go first. Otherwise she'll steal the good stuff. I reckon if I could speak to... I was Slim's youth pastor. Came to our youth group via a sports program we were running 126 years ago. And there were some things, I'm going to share a little bit about it tonight, but there were some things in my heart that, we've walked out over the last few decades. But if I could talk to that guy that was his youth leader, I would tell him to dig deeper wells. I would suggest the first few years of ministry, I was winging it, almost bragging over the fact that I was winging it. And, I'm doing a lot with the little bit I know. Well, get to know a lot more. Bible says study to show yourself approved. And I really wish I'd probably put in some harder yards. God is blessed, and I'm a learner, and I learn on the run. But I think I could have dug deeper wells younger. It does take some of the stress out. I used to hear people say, I was, fairly young in ministry, and I was only a few chapters ahead of the church. I said, you were a few chapters. I was a page and a half ahead of. Every Sunday I'd come home because we went from being the youth team to the church. We literally, the youth ministry took over the church. That's a true story. And so one day I was a youth pastor, next day I was a senior pastor at 27. And I used to go home every Sunday and say, Jesus, I don't know when you're coming back, but tonight would suit me because I've told them the last thing I know. I wish I'd put deeper wells. Second thing, I would tell him to be really wise with the relationships you form because you become what you hang around. And I thank God for mentors and wise people that found me, but I wasn't as intentional as I could have been. Yeah. All right? God... some of the people that came into my life, and that was great. And the other thing I'd say to that guy is don't sweat the small stuff. We get so caught up on stuff that ultimately doesn't matter. The last 12 months or so, I've had this real fresh revelation of eternity. And I brought up the old youth pastor. About 6 months ago, Paul, I got that really, 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 really long rope from Bunnings and put, a piece of tape right at the end. Yeah. And if the rest of the rope's eternity, that's your life, And we spend all our life trying to get to retirement, which is like that much of that much compared to that. And I had somebody run around the room about 3 times. And I stopped one day when I was teaching on the whole concept of eternity. He's made all things beautiful, Solomon writes to Ecclesiastes. He's made all things beautiful in its time. Too many Christians stop there. Stop the end of the sentence, let alone the verse. It says, and he has put eternity in our hearts. We sometimes get caught up in the small stuff that's here and now rather than there and then. And I think in the light of tomorrow, some things don't matter. That guy that cut you off in the traffic, it doesn't even matter tomorrow. So why do we get so stirred up? That email that you got today won't matter next week. And some of the stuff that we get so energized and sometimes upset about in the light of eternity, can I tell you, eternity is the great leveler. And I think I probably got a little too caught up in stuff that doesn't matter. And not a lot. But, every day wasted is a day lost. And I think I would rather have, if I could say, stay out of that stuff. Just get on with what matters for the sake of the kingdom of God.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Scott, what would you tell your younger self?
Yeah, I think I build on a little bit what Wayne is saying. I remember the poet Tagore. He's the first guy to win the Nobel Prize for Literature out of India. But he described a violin string when it sits on a table by itself with not a lot of purpose. But the moment that it's bound to an instrument, it finds its song. It has the ability to become what it was designed to be the moment that it's bound. I guess I would have advised that person to submit to authority early, that authority is important, that God calls you into other relationships that will continue to grow you. All of us need a mentor, would you agree? And all of us to be mentoring. And I think even from the message that Wayne shared, as we're on this journey, whether it's Gilgal or Bethel or whether it's Jericho, I'd encourage you to do it with somebody. Because when we're doing it with somebody, we're more accountable. And we need people to hold us so that we keep ourselves where God needs us and wants us to be.
Yeah, wow, so good, so good. Austin, youth pastor.
Deeper wells.
Yep, deeper wells, brother, deeper wells. How are you navigating the tension between honouring past generations and leading your own generation with fresh vision?
It's a big question. Look, it's so, in my context, in the church world, it's so easy to point fingers at the older generation. But a wise man told me this once, and it's, don't throw away the new because of the old, but don't ignore the old because of the new. So what I mean by that is to honour the past, you've got to do it, right? You've got to honour the past. Thank you for paving the way. And the wrong thing to do is to pick up that gun and point it and say, but this is what you did wrong.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge of leadership for my generation is actually taking responsibility in this moment. And you know me so well, Slim, this is I'm not good at this. But I think my generation has to do this. We got to say thank you for what you did.
That's it.
But it's my responsibility now
Yeah.
to change what needs to be changed.
Yeah.
Because one day they're going to point it at me.
Yeah.
And what that person told me is, don't throw away the new because of the old. Stay in it. Stay in the game. Yeah. You're needed there. This generation, you're so needed there. But don't ignore the old with the new.
Yeah.
It's our responsibility.
Yeah. Well said, mate. I want to honour Austin as well. We've had some big wrestles over the last 7 years. The generation gap for us is very, very prevalent. And but man, I'm really proud of you in the way that you've just engaged in that. So great job. Jess, what has helped you to stay spiritually healthy and resilient across the different seasons of leadership? You mentioned you've been a youth pastor and now you're co-leading in pastoring. What has helped you stay healthy and resilient?
Just loving the Lord, of course, and But he is my strength, and we sing our firm foundation. He is my firm foundation. That helps me to stay strong and resilient. There's things that over time, you know, when you hear things being talked about, when Pastor Wayne, when you were talking about the church, the bride of Christ this morning, anytime, even if we're singing a song and it comes about the church, the things about the church rises up inside of me like, yes, those are the things, you know, the things that spark joy. And it's like, this is part of why I'm here on this planet. That keeps me also grounded. This is what I know I'm born for, is I'm born to help to build the church to the glory of God. And knowing the things that, and doing and being a part of what you know that you were created to do, I think also helps to keep you really secure, and you know whatever season of life that you're in, whether it is the young parents or it's in full-time work or whatever it is, it's like, but I know what I'm called to do, and however that looks, I'm going to be a part about building it. Yeah, beautiful. That answers the question, but it's like that. He is my firm foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Beautiful. Pastor Wayne and Pastor Scott, what do you see as the greatest need or gap in leadership in the next generation?
Too many young people want to take shortcuts. They see people, let's say my age, other people, 50s, 60s, whatever, never knowing the journey and the price that was paid, and they want it now. Do the journey. The Bible says, Psalm 126, you sow in tears, you'll reap in joy. And I think the whole idea, because we're so bombarded with stuff in a digital world, we can see what such and such church, such and such ministry's got. We don't realize, we see the one moment picture, never realizing the pain and the journey and the prayer and the yards that were put in. And I, as you know, for a long time, I led the movement that this ministry and others in this room are part of. And too many times, I've had to scrape up leaders in churches off the pavement because people took shortcuts. Most of it was driven by ego, where the perception of success was trying to be projected rather than the journey of discipleship and obedience. You keep doing the right thing. The Bible says in Galatians 6, I've been driven by hundreds of young leaders to conferences and whatever, and they always say, Pastor Wayne, what's the key to leadership? Well, I said, here's the deal. Galatians 6:9 says, don't get weary doing good, because in due season you'll reap if you don't faint. So just keep turning up, and don't surrender to the pressure to show a perceived level of success by manufacturing stuff that literally is not authentic. Be the authentic you, and it will come along. And then God goes, and he breathes on things, and sometimes they explode. But if not, just be faithful. I'm going to preach more about this tonight. Just keep turning up and stop trying to be someone you're not. All right? Listen, social media has created these monsters in leadership where we're trying to project that we're as good as them and we're doing that. Listen to me. Look this way. Almost every photo on social media is a lie. I went to a baseball game in New York a couple of years ago, Slim. It was the most boring thing I've ever been to in my whole life. And then I got home, and I watched ESPN. There was, out of like 300 hours of throw, miss, next throw, miss. It's like, really? And they laugh at cricket. Anyway, let's move on. So I get home. In the whole game, one guy took a screamer of a catch, one-handed in the outfield. It was amazing. I got home. You know what they did? They showed that in the highlights. Yep. Everybody watching thought that's what the whole game was like. Yep. No, it was boring. It was really, really boring. Trouble is, you jump on Instagram and Facebook, and you know what you do? You see the play of the day, and you think everybody's, amazing. No, they're not. They're having to wipe snotty noses and boot butts and do everything that you're having to do in leadership, all right? Forget what's on social media. Just be obedient to the call of God and don't try and take a shortcut. You'll be okay.
And then we go on to a 5-day test cricket. That's
It's amazing.
I think authenticity is actually a real good point. And I think that to recognize, as I was mentioning earlier, real freedom comes when we are bound to Jesus in an authentic, intimate way. And I think there just seems, at least in my personal opinion, a lack of real intimacy. And intimacy has been conjured up. We live in these spaces of, what's real, what's not real. It becomes a lot more difficult and more confusing with the TikToks and everything else that's out there. And I think as much as, and I'd be the first one to say that we still need to be relevant. We need to be using technology and story and media, and I'm at the forefront, or like somewhat I am. But there is a real divide between the digital natives and the digital immigrant like myself. And try to understand that, and how do we raise up leaders that are living in a very different space, that have very different challenges, but it's the same thing. How do we grow intimacy? How do we grow this idea of being fully surrendered to the Lord and His will? And how does that play out? The issues are still the same. It's just a real different playing field, whether it's baseball or cricket.
Cricket's just baseball played properly.
Woo. Now, listen, I've been living in India for 41 years.
He knows.
So, just so you know, I know my cricket.
It's interesting you talk about this thing about intimacy as well, because it's just not really about just the church, it's the community generally, right? There's this lack of intimacy and a desire to find community, but looking for it on things like social media aren't going to help. And one thing I've noticed in church life is that if we don't focus on building community, like real community and intimacy in our churches, I've found that there are church people who will go and look for a mother's group in the community because that's where they're finding this level of intimacy. It's not because they don't want to be part of the church, it's because we're not actually offering that for them. We're not engaged. The once a month church attendee at either 1 or an 8:30 or a 10:30, I mean, the chances of you building community with another family is actually pretty remote. So it's definitely a challenge for us. This question is for all of you. What's a mistake or failure that taught you something that you still carry today? I'm not targeting at you, Austin. Stop looking at me like that.
I can start. You want me to start? I'm about to share a story that's going to make me look terrible, but
Good.
It glorifies God. So I started youth pastoring when I was 20, and it was under Slim's leadership. And that first year for me was pretty tough, hey. Yeah, we fought a lot of battles, but I remember
Together, we fought a lot of battles together.
Yeah, we did, not against each other. In my youth, I remember talking to God and saying, look at my team holistically. Here's 100% of my team. I think I can do this with 50%. So Lord, can you just transition that 50% out? Thanks, that'll be great. Legit prayed this prayer just so everyone's aware. And I was like, these guys I'm struggling with, just can't build any relationship with. They don't like me. I don't know what's going on, all this. And I prayed about it. And then over a 12-month period, God started to remove the 50% I prayed for to stay until my whole team was everyone I didn't want to have. And I know this sounds terrible, but I want to say this. It was God telling me, it's not on your terms, mate. And He said, you are not giving these people a chance. There's leadership in this room. You need to do more. You're the problem. And now that team that I think I led for about 8 years at Gosford, man, I love that team so much. And that 50% that stuck around, they are family to me. And they are a beautiful group of people who I will never forget. Friends forever. We just, ride or die in your ministry. And I just, the mistake I made was thinking, God, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And he just punched me in the face and said, mate, you got no idea. And you know what? I'm thankful he did.
Yeah.
Because like I said, that's relationships that I cherish forever. They're family to me, those guys, and they always will be.
It's a great lesson, mate. Thank you. For all of you, a mistake or failure that taught you something you still carry today.
Never ignore that inner voice. You know, there are some people that it looks right, or some moment looks right, but you ignore it to your pain. And can I tell you, there are leaders in this room. The Bible says, lay hands suddenly on no man. And I've appointed people to positions when in my heart the Holy Spirit was saying, not yet. And you do it. It's very easy to give somebody a position or a job. It's very hard to take it off them. You'll damage them and or your relationship. And I've ignored it. And I'm learning more and more to be just a little more discerning, a little more quick to say, okay, Lord, and slow some things down. So develop that inner ear of the Spirit. Develop it, work at it. Get to recognize the voice of God. If I was to pick up the phone right now and ring Lynn, I would not have to say, hello, my name is Wayne Elkhorn. The minute I say, hey there, she'll melt. Tell him he's dreaming. Okay. The minute she hears my voice, one word, she knows who it is. Are you walking close enough with the Lord that you quickly recognize his voice? Be quick to, like the culture you say here, say yes. Okay, Lord. And there are days I've ignored it and tried to rationalize, we could make that work, we could make them work, and you're setting them, that, and you up for failure and for pain. Learn quickly. And it's a little bit better in leadership if you do.
I'd echo the same thing, except I'd say it that journey with your spouse. Don't let her be the last person to know what you're up to. And as you make decisions as much as possible, if you're really friends, if you really have the kind of relationship that God always meant you to be, they're your biggest cheerleader, and you ought to be confiding. And so the lesson I learned early on is I didn't confide enough with Melody. I didn't learn to trust her voice as well, because it's a real important voice as we do things together.
Scott, haven't you heard that their voice is sometimes the exact same as...
Well, there you go. See, I guess I should...
Speak, Lord. You're so
Anyway, she's more apt to slap me in the head anyhow. So, but and I think that journeying together, there's a real strength and there's safety in that place.
Yeah, great.
One of my mistakes was maybe 20 years ago or something, but I had a group of people that we went to a conference down in Melbourne. It was my responsibility to bring them back, and we missed the plane because of my lack of organisation and timing, and my phlegmaticness, my chilledness, kicked in. And it was pretty costly. We all had to buy extra tickets, and cost a lot of money, and it also meant people's holidays were delayed and impacted wider family, and I had to say sorry publicly and individually. And but out of that, I learned so much about having margin, just creating margin in your life. Margin, I thought we'd get there, but when Jetstar says no, they say no. And I just really learned about margin. Create some margin in your life in case interruptions happen, in case obstacles happen, and that's flowed over into lots of different areas in my life. But also just get organised. If you're a leader and God's gifted it in your life, don't just rely on the gift, get organised, because your organisation actually helps to release other people to do what they're called to do. Your lack of organisation will be like what Pastor Mark talked about this morning, like putting on a constraint on someone else. And that's just slack. That's just poor leadership. So learn to have some margin and organisation, and that has been very helpful the hard way in my life.
Jess, can I tell you a story? Yep. As we've already said, I was this guy's youth leader, then youth pastor, and then senior pastor. You may not remember this, Paul, but you walked into my office 42 years ago, and I had the back office in the old Pring Street thing, and you were he was ex-Air Force, so, you know, discipline and everything. And you said to me, Wayne, you got a lot of gifts on your life. You got this going for you and that going for you, but here's the one thing I've noticed. You're always late. Right? And I went, oh, no, I'm not. And then I replayed it over the next 24 hours, and he was right. And can I tell you something? It literally, it was brutal. The Bible says, faithful are the wounds of a friend. You want to be a better leader? Listen to people that care for you. And that area of margin is now literally, I've squeezed a lot of stuff into the last few decades of my life, and I couldn't have done it if I was slack, if the diary didn't matter, if the watch didn't matter. You know, we got to say, everybody, if you come to my staff meetings, you know, someone walks in, I say early years, and they go on time. And it's literally how I live my life. And a lot of it can be traced back to that one conversation in the back office in Ipswich because of you, my friend. And that's the truth. So I want to honour him. Yeah. So listen to your friends. They've got good in store for you.
Can I just say sorry?
Every Monday as well. He did it to me every Monday morning. You're late, Oz.
Yeah, I'm sorry I said that. I must have been so, wow. I don't remember it, by the way. But I do remember with Austin would rock in at 9:05, and we got to a point where I'd get all the staff to stand behind the sliding door, so he wouldn't see us. The door would open and we'd all be standing there, and I'd be like, it's 9:05, Oz. He'd go, oh, the traffic lights over there were really this, and you know, and I'm like, nah.
That was a long time ago.
Oh, it was a long time ago, Oz. It was a long time
ago. About it, mate, so keep it going, it's good.
But I also say about, you know, Pastor Wayne, when I was still weighing up whether I was going to, you know, be in church and out of church. I wasn't saved yet. You know, I was pursuing some of the female talent that was at the church at the time as an unsaved person. And sorry,
you were on your own, mate. We had quite a buffet.
Yes,
so,
was a smorgasbord. But I remember I hadn't been to the youth group or the church for a few months, and I just decided to turn up one. I think it was a Wednesday or Thursday night. We had a house next to the church, and the youth leaders would have a prayer meeting there every Wednesday night. And I remember turning up late because I didn't want to sort of be seen and in there. I remember walking into this room, and they all had their eyes closed and praying. And I just sat at the back of the room, and then Pastor Wayne just started praying for me. They were all praying for me. And they didn't know I was in the room. They didn't know I was coming. I hadn't been for months. And it just had such a profound impact on me. I thought, I mean, these people really care. Like, they really care. And the shock they got when they opened their eyes, like, oh, Lord, bring him in.
Bring him home, Lord. Bring him in.
You know?
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. But also say, Scott, I think you mentioned something quite profound, because this idea of sharing this journey with your wife or your husband, you know, if you're in ministry, because my wife, like Lynn, Pastor Wayne's wife, they're not upfront people. You know, they're not called to lead in that way. And sometimes you can feel like they're just off to the side, you know, and they do their thing and you do yours. And, you know, I have had discussions in the past around, hey, you shouldn't share your challenges with people's lives with your spouse, you know. But I think as pastors, we need an outlet. We need someone we can share the journey with and share our frustrations with and share our... Otherwise, you know, where do you take that? I mean, we take it to God, but we also need something that we're going to walk and stand with. And so I would just encourage those of you here, if you have a spouse that's, you know, up front and leading and you're not in that space, you still have a part to play. You still have a very big part to play. And so I'd encourage you in that as well. I want to make some time for questions. And so Ethan's got a mic there. Is there anyone who has questions for anyone on the panel? Otherwise, I'll have more. One down the front here.
How would you, with all this conversation about health in the church and the Instagram and how the Facebook, all the stuff that everything looks good online, and we can be so competitive, particularly I think in Pentecostal churches. How would you, any of you, define, how do you think Jesus would define a healthy, successful church? Yeah, because we can be competitive, but what does Jesus want
I
it?
think try to redefine what success might look like. I challenge us the question: are we discipling well, and do we send well? So we often measure success by how many we can gather, but could we turn the table and measure it by how many we send?
I actually had a very similar response to that. And the other thing is, are we being authentic? The thing God called us to do. Okay, and that's health. Most of the times healthy things grow, but not always. All right, I've seen bonsai, incredibly healthy. But, and so sometimes that you've got to actually also recognize context. So it's not just about numbers, but are we making disciples who actually are truly living out their faith? And are we all together walking transparently before God and each other? If it's healthy, you know what? You just know. If you spend your life as a leader worshiping on a Sunday like that and on Instagram and comparing, when comparison fades and discipleship's elevated, you're doing okay. You're right. Ego is the fuel of comparison, right? So rather than compliment, I compete. And I think one of the other things about healthy church is not just healthy inside, it's healthy outside. And you know as a leader.
I think success is being obedient, and obedience is success. God says he desires obedience, not sacrifice, right? Above all, and you see that all through Scripture. So whatever God has called the church to do, which is to go and make disciples, and that's success, isn't it? So we have to be obedient to what God says. And delayed obedience is disobedience.
Any other questions?
I think I'd love to hear a little bit about finances and providing for your family, and maybe just looking back over the decades of the seasons of finances, any ideas or strategies that you guys might have.
That's a big question.
How do I get rich?
Make it a little more specific.
I think just I'm assuming you've all got kids that are grown up, providing for themselves now, but I'm not the young fella on the end, but but how do you think about finances now compared to when you were younger, and what would you tell your younger self?
I think I would just rethink it through. I think it's never a money problem, it's usually an idea problem. I remember going into India, and this is the mid-'80s, and having a lot of promised support that never came. Struggling financially, having to go back and live with family, do a lot of different things. And then really out of that place of desperation, I started a number of businesses in India. And I haven't really taken a salary from the ministry for decades. Haven't done a newsletter in 28 years. I think we have this conventional thinking about finance in the church and how a pastor, and I'm all for, the pastor getting compensated real well. At least I'm just speaking for me, that I think, we serve such a creative God, right? That we don't necessarily think conventional around revenue.
I'm a preacher's kid. I didn't realize it, but when I was growing up, we were probably the poorest family in town. And somehow, even in that moment, God took the love of money, he took it out of my heart. And over the years, I've just learned if you can live with an open hand, it's amazing how much can flow through it. We could talk a whole lot about the ministries that I've seen God cause to flourish. It's not about what goes through your hand, it's what sticks in your heart. And never making that the important thing. Let me flip it back into your family. Bible says if you don't care for your own, you're worse than an infidel. Our first priority is to ensure that our family, which is our first church, is well cared for. And I think sometimes some of us rush too quickly to get into ministry at the cost of some of the important things in our own family. And I've seen that. I've lived it. But I've also realized that when I get to a point of surrender, again, being Paul's youth pastor, I took a 70% pay cut to leave a really good job to go and serve in youth ministry. But I've just realized God doesn't owe me a thing. I can never outgive God. And when I put principles of stewardship in place then, they're almost still the same ratios. Just the numbers are bigger. But God has continued to bless and provide as I've never made that the main thing. Never made the lordship of Jesus the priority. He gets the best, he gets the first. And it's amazing, as Jesus teaches, Matthew 6, if I seek first the kingdom, the other things are added. But I've just found when we make money the main thing rather than Jesus as Lord, it gets a little weird. But he truly is Jehovah Jireh. I could stand here for an hour and tell you story after story, rapid fire of how God provides. But I've got to, number one, make him Lord and go at a pace and a rate that's just, I just understand his leading in those areas. All right. So yeah, it's a big issue, but never make it the issue. Make his lordship number one and he'll guide you.
I know you wanted to hear from the older people, but I'll chime in if that's all right. I think I wouldn't mind being a bit more practical here, but like there's somewhere in Ephesians where it talks about the body and everyone comes together within that means to do their part. I don't think God will never ask you to go into debt. God's never going to ask you to give as much as you don't have. But for my wife and I, look, it's a stretch for me to be in ministry, 100%. And I would actually say publicly in this room, we would probably both want to be in ministry, but we can't. But for the season we're in, and the smart thing for us to do is, my wife's role at the moment for us in ministry is to support the youth ministry behind the scenes with prayer and investment. I might be on the front lines doing that work, but she's behind the scenes praying for every single youth leader of our church. And that's, in terms of the church and leadership, how we do our relationship. But for us, it would not be smart for us to both do ministry. So I hope it's okay to say, if it doesn't work for you or your household, don't do it. Or in any terms of leadership, you've got to prioritize your family and your household first. And with this question, I think we should point it back to the last question, which is, what is success to you? Success to me is not how much money I've got in the bank. I feel like that's actually a gift on me. Money for me is, if it's there, it's there. Pip's the financial treasurer of our relationship. Success to me is when I walk through the door at home and I hold my son and I say, we're here together, we're doing something amazing, and we're doing our part in the body, what Paul speaks of in Ephesians, together as a family. And I believe one day when we can and when it's possible, we'll do it together.
Yeah, I'm not sure of your context, obviously, but if I could just speak into that, this idea of seasons, the season now might be, well, if I try and start a church, or if I'm working for the church, this is going to be really a financial struggle for us to provide for my family and my kids. Look, there's a faith element to that, but there's also wisdom, and it might be, well, no, maybe, Pastor Dave, he talks about marketplace ministry all the time. Maybe I work 3 days so I can support my family and I go and work for the church for a day or something like that. Or maybe for this season, it's just called to be Jesus' hands and feet in a, secular marketplace and do what God wants you to do there. But there are seasons in ministry, and sometimes I think we can get caught in the idea that success is that, God, I believe you've called me to be in ministry full time and that's all I'm going to go for, but we can do it at the expense of our family. And so I think we've got to be accountable for our yes. If we accept a role in a church and it's not paying what we think it should, well, you said yes to it. And you can always say, yes, I'll go and do something else. One of the challenges that I see is that sometimes, depending on the work environment we come out of, if you work for a government organisation where you get pay rises every year and you get so much leave every year, sometimes you can come out of that and expect that that's going to happen in the church, and sometimes it just can't happen. And so what we have to be able to do is to say, well, you know, if I'm going to say yes to this, then I've got to accept the cost that comes with that, or choose another option, and that's okay. So that would be my only feedback on that. Another question? Yes, you had one. Bradley? There you go.
Hi. How do you create or build vision and enthusiasm for a new season for your body and your church, while also not rejecting the call to remain content within the body and where you're at?
That's a water bottle, not a microphone. I don't think any of us should ever be fully satisfied. Stay hungry. Always, you know, what does the psalmist tell? Enter his gates with thanksgiving in our hearts. Always be thankful. But always come into his presence saying, God, you want to speak to me about something new. And take ground, but look for new horizons constantly. And the other thing as a leader, that vision has to burn in you. You know, wasn't Jeremiah says your words it's like a fire burning in my bones. Wait until it's so hot in you that you just explode. Just find a couple of people you can walk with. Jesus walked with one, he walked with 3, and he walked with 12. Find your 3 and your 1 that you can actually process this with before you even bring it out. You know, that's where that iron sharpens iron, right? But never cease being grateful for where you've come from and the ground you've taken. But allow, if you're a leader, there should be a prophetic edge to you. You know, what's the old saying? If anyone who thinks that if you're a leader and you're taking a walk and no one's following, you're just taking a walk. All right. So take people with you. Share your vision constantly. You know, you should always be seeing new things. That's part of being a leader. You can see what they can't see, but find the seasons. That was a message Paul gave before. Find the season, find the moment, and share it progressively, but get it refined in the counsel of your friends and those you trust.
I think on top of that, I think need drives vision. And as long as you're seeing that need, and needs are uniquely seen, right? And I think there's unique tools given to us that then challenge us to have a different type of vision, like the adoption of AI in what we're doing as a church and things. And so I think good leaders are always looking out. They're recognizing the need of our communities, which will still drive your vision, which requires a fresh look. And it requires a fresh look because of the new tools given to all of us, right? Whether it's been in that social media place, now it's AI. It's a lot of other things that are going to continue to contend with your strategy, contend with you from just settling in on what has been, but to recognize, you know, vision is going to be driven by the need, that, you know, by your ability to see things in your community that people are in the gap, right? They're needing to be rescued, and you got a brand new toolbox to do it.
Awesome. I think you had a question. Sorry for these people over here. I had my back to you and haven't seen hands, but yeah.
That's all good. Hi, guys. So just knowing that you guys have been talking leadership in terms of like ministry, but maybe for people who are in the marketplace, I was just wondering that in a marketplace that often celebrates values that are contrary to the biblical perspectives or principles, such as the self-promotion over humility or profit over integrity, how can Christian leaders outside of church context practically lead with biblical conviction without compromising their faith or being sidelined? Can you share real examples where you've seen this done well or where you've had to navigate this tension yourself? Thank you.
I can share one, a very practical one. So I was in the military for 9 years. My last 18 months in the military, I was bullied by a senior officer every day for pretty much 18 months. And when you're in the military, you don't have any control over that. You don't have an HR department that you can go to. You're basically stuck with that. And, you know, there were things that were occurring that I didn't agree with as a believer, that I stood up for and paid a price for. There were other people in my section who were Christians that no one knew were Christians. And it wasn't until we would go on an exercise, because I was a non-drinker, I was always put on exercises because they needed a designated driver to get them all home. And so when I would go on these trips, I'd have these people who I didn't even know were believers would come up to me, half drunk, and just start to pour their heart out and say how they felt ashamed because of the fact that they were on Sunday, they were going to church with their wives and their families, but they just didn't feel like they could stand up for their values in an environment that was very hostile to the Christian faith. And so I had this 18 months where I was bullied by this warrant officer, and I actually got a letter from the government last year giving an official apology for the abuse that I copped through that. But every day I would walk into that place not knowing what was going to come, and I would just say, Holy Spirit, I'm going to be your witness today. And I would see him come across the hangar floor, and he would pinpoint me and eye me off, and I would walk beside him, walk in front of him, and I'd go, morning, sir, how you doing? You having a good day? I'm having a good day today. And he would just fume. Just every day he would fume, and he would just pile it on, you know. And as we got to the end of that 18 months, I was terminating my contract in the Defence Force. He called me into his office and he said, what are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm hoping to work with young people in high schools, which Pastor Wayne released me into. And he basically said, why would you throw your life away? And I said, well, to be perfectly honest, sir, I don't really see why you would care, given the last 18 months. And he said, my son is a missionary and he's thrown his life away. And he said, I don't want that to happen to anyone else. And I realized that the persecution that I was under was because I was a Christian. But, you know, outside that 18 months, there were two guys in that squadron, Pastor Wayne knows who they are, that gave their lives to the Lord. One was a Buddhist, the other one was an atheist, gave their lives to the Lord. And within 12 months of getting out of the Air Force, two other guys who were in that squadron had recommitted their lives to the Lord, and one of them became a chaplain for the World Surfing Tour. And so it comes down to identity, really. I mean, we talked about Daniel in one of the messages, right? And I think it was Dustin's message. Lord, whatever comes, I'm surrendered to you. I'm not going to be influenced by the world. If I have to take a stand, whatever that cost is, I'll take that stand. But God will use that. People are watching all of the time to see if your faith is real, to see if your faith is genuine. Just not prepared to compromise for the sake of bowing to the principles of this world or people of this world. So that would be my advice. Just stick to your guns. Stick to your guns. Jesus gave it all for us. Let's just show that, you know, what we have is real and authentic and that it's worth having.
I don't think the standards, sorry, Jess, I don't think the standards for anybody in the marketplace should be anything different to those serving on a church staff at all. In fact, I think the standards for those in the marketplace need to be every bit, if not higher. Because, you know, the Bible tells me in 2 Corinthians 5, we're Christ's ambassadors. Yeah. And okay, if we're on staff, we're working with Christians. You're in the marketplace, you're working with humans. I get it. But you're working with people that are watching you all the time. And, you know, there will be moments, and I think every day you should say, Father, I just pray that my life is such a message that somebody's going to ask me, as the Bible says, for the hope that's within me. But I know David's, he's gone out now to have a smoke, but before, there he is. You know, and I know you've been championing the whole, you know, marketplace ministry. We're all ministers of the gospel. Yeah. Ephesians tells me that some of us that are on a pastoral team, our job is merely to equip you to go and do ministry really well. There is no change in the standards for us to live lives of integrity, following Jesus well, no matter who we are. Because you know what? We've got to go to the supermarket. We've got to walk downtown. Our kids are in the footy clubs, and we've got to live life under the spotlight and under the investigation of everybody that watches us. And I hope that no matter whether you're a minister at an accounting firm or a minister in a youth ministry, all of us literally live out the same standards as followers of Jesus. Yeah.